Welcome to my rental kitchen. I am wearing comfy wear because I'm actually working in here today. So this is not my kitchen, commercial kitchen down at the bar, and it's not my home kitchen. This is the kitchen for my rental suites that my husband and I rent out that are right above the bar. And I was using it just because it's been empty this week, and I'm doing some cooking videos. So I'm back in the kitchen, but I didn't want to do them in my commercial kitchen because I didn't want to scare people off from the recipes or cooking videos for those online classes. So it doesn't appear, or it shows how easy it is to do all these rolled recipes at home. So I thought I'd use a standard home kitchen, which is be similar to what we have here. So I've been using this. But I also stayed here. If you watched the last episode, you'll see or hear about how my husband and I stayed in 14-day isolation when we came back from Cuba. We essentially hopped in our car in Toronto and picked up our car after we got off the plane, and we drove straight to Sudbury, pulled up in a parking lot where we have a parking spot nearby. We didn't even go to our house, just suitcases, everything we had from Cuba, including what we were wearing, what we had packed, and we came directly in here. Luckily, I had our son stock our fridge and our fridge and pantry and everything with stuff for us ahead of time, so that we did not have to go out. So we stayed here for a week, and then eventually when Norm's staff were set up to work from home, because his office is actually attached to our house and we didn't want to cause any problems for his staff, once they were safely gone, now we can go back to the house. So we stayed there for a week, and then we're back at the house on Pine Street. So while I was here, it was back into the, okay, so what do I stock my kitchen with for this 14-day isolation period? Because I wanted it to be things that are quick. I want it to go with based on our lifestyle, what we usually like to eat, but I didn't want to overly spend a lot of money. I didn't want to have a lot of waste. We also had to get other people to take our garbage away from us when we were here. So there's a lot of things you have to look out for when you're in that isolation period. So I thought I'd share some tips for you of how to, some main things to keep on hand that you can have and create quick meals regardless of how many people are in your household, without having to go to the grocery store every few days. Because the whole idea of this is that you should not have to go to a grocery store. Doesn't matter how big your family is. If you've planned ahead, you can do this once every couple of weeks. I would even challenge you that if you had enough freezer space, you could actually do this once a month if you needed to. Now, I would suggest using the online delivery services from grocery stores if there's one near you, even if you are in isolation and can do the pickup order. So we did that on our way back to the house without having any contact with anyone. We essentially pulled up to the PC Express here in Ontario. We had pre-ordered everything, set aside time to pick up our order, pulled up to the parking spot. We called from the car to say we were out front. When the staff member from the grocery store came out, we just popped the trunk. He loaded the bags into the trunk. We had mask and glove on anyways, but essentially I just waved at him. We closed the trunk and we left. So there was no contact with any grocery stores. We didn't have to go in. No chance of us putting anyone in harm's way or danger in case we were contaminated. So it was a win-win. So I suggest you use those. Now, for a list of things. So I actually took my notebook that I had brought with me to Cuba to say some of the things that I specifically asked Alex to leave for us, and was a big help while we were gone. And pardon me, I'm keeping an eye on, I've got cheddar wafers that I use for the cooking demo in the oven. So I always used to say during my cooking classes that the key to stretching out anything is, I call it a vehicle. I don't remember where I got that term, but it's just something that carries something else. So this is where you're gonna have all your sides. So potatoes are a great source. You can boil them, you can mash them, you can roast them. When the barbecue's up, you can put them on the barbecue. You can use them as a base for things like making gnocchi from scratch. There's a lot of things that potato can do. So if you have a big family, get a full bag. If you there's only a couple of you, you can get like maybe 4 or 6. depending on what's on sale. Just make sure to store them in a cool, dark place, not necessarily in your fridge, but that will actually extend them and they'll stay for quite a while. The second thing, so things like rice and pastas. So even if you're gluten intolerant, rices are good. Don't just get regular rice, like rice kits, because sometimes those are not the healthiest. But plain white rice, arborio rice, you can make risottos out of just about anything. Rice is great to add with stir-fried meats or vegetables, but rice is always a good one to have on hand. Same thing with pastas. I bought all different kinds of shapes and noodles of different sizes. I can throw them in soups or stews. I can make quick pasta dishes out of just about anything, vegetarian or otherwise, but it's a good thing to stretch out leftover ingredients that you have in the fridge. Speaking of leftovers, don't get rid of things. I have taken, I had spinach salad that I had bought, that he had bought for me from the deli section, and I didn't finish it all one day, so there was leftover baby spinach, and there was leftover red onion, and there was leftover some chopped egg and some mushroom. So I made some, cooked some noodles, cooled them down, and basically made a pasta salad out of them. It was like a spinach salad, pasta salad kind of thing. So don't ever waste things. Eggs. I wanted to talk about eggs because I guess everybody has figured out that they're a great protein source, and they are something that people are overbuying and hoarding from grocery stores. So why don't you start thinking of something different? Don't just look at the regular classic eggs. Look at egg whites in containers to stretch it out. Sometimes you can get a frozen whole eggs in pourable containers. So that's great for omelets, quick scrambles, used for baking. There are other things, and save the whole eggs for whole egg use. This way you don't have to be so stressed about that limit where they're only telling you that you can only buy 1 or 2 dozen at a time. So keep that in mind. Puff pastries. So these are your not just appetizer things. I like to use them for all kinds of stuff. So if you want to get fancy one day and had a soup or cream soup or something and put it in a bowl, if you had an oven safe bowl, you could cover the top with puff pastry and then throw it in the oven. It gets all puffy, and then you'd almost have like this beautiful like chowder thing underneath with puff pastry on top. You can also substitute that if you wanted to make like a French onion soup. Instead of having that with the cheese on it, you can also put like maybe the puff pastry pieces with cheese. It still puffs up at high temperature. Yes, you can wrap brie or other soft cheeses around it and do a baked brie one day if you wanted to treat yourself to something fancy. Phyllo pastry, people get nervous about it, but you just take a few sheets at a time, brush it with butter or oil, and then you can wrap all kinds of things in there. So besides just making the classic things like spanakopita, you can put spinach and feta, you can put leftover chicken, you can put other kind of vegetables, wrap them all up in these buttered or oiled sheets, throw them on parchment paper in the oven and bake them until they're golden brown. You can make little appetizer sized portions, you can make little turnovers. Speaking of turnovers, you can also use the phyllo pastry for making things like apple turnovers, or using up fruit that might be bruised and maybe those berries aren't looking the greatest anymore, but you don't want to get rid of them because they're so good. You can actually slice them, chop them up, and then put them in these little turnover things. So that's the thing between phyllo pastry and puff pastry. You've got a lot of flexibility there. Tomato sauce. It's tempting to buy all of the cheap canned stuff that has a lot of sugar and sodium in it, but I always say to get the classic tomato puree, or sometimes called tomato passata. It is basically just cooked strained tomatoes in jars. You can do all kinds of things with that. It can be a base to throw in for soups when you want a tomato flavor. You can of course make a classic, any kind of a tomato based sauce with it. You can stretch it out with barbecue sauces when you want to do braising liquids. There's a lot of uses for it, and they're not really expensive. For $1 or $2, you can get a really tall jar of it to leave it in your fridge to use whenever you want. Tomato sauces are an easy one. Kids, everybody will use it at all times. Wine. Even if you are not a drinker, I suggest you get some wine. That's going to take any of your basic cooking things to a different level. So adding a splash of red wine in a sauce will change one thing. It's a great way to deglaze a pan. So if you pan seared even a steak, so it's a classic Bordelaise style steak is when you take, you sear your steak at high temperature in a cast iron pan, and then after you take the steak out and you're letting it rest, you would put in a splash of red wine to scrape up all the bits on the bottom, a pat of butter to sort of make up the sauce, and that's going to be your little sauce to drizzle on your steak. So you can make pan sauces like that with anything, and wine is a great deglazer that way. So just be careful not to put it on high heat on a gas thing with flames, of course. But you can make, I'm not a big sauce girl, so I like even pastas just with like white wine, garlic, oil, fresh herbs, that kind of thing is great to use as an alternative to a regular sauce. Garlic, I just mentioned, you can get either a clove, a head of it with the different cloves, or get yourself one of those small jars of minced fresh garlic. It'll make all the difference. You can add garlic in just about anything, and it'll come in handy. Variety of spices. Don't overload with spices. Check your spice rack to make sure that you don't have things you can use up first, and then maybe get yourself a couple of these spice blends that you can use on an ongoing basis. So there's I had a lemon and herb one the other day I used to throw into a marinade for lamb chops. And I have another one I was making kind of a braising liquid for some ribs, and I had this Cajun blend. So if you have a couple of ones that are your good go-tos, garlic and herb type things, just keep a couple of those in handy instead of stocking up on 20 different herbs or dried spices, because otherwise you have to go to the bulk barn or the bulk section in your grocery store, and with cross-contamination and stuff, I would suggest you stay away from the bulk sections whenever you can. Okay, and the last things are dairy. Dairy and deli. So dairy section, number one thing to keep in your fridge, which will stretch out your cooking, is heavy cream. So not the 18% table cream, not the 10% half and half. I'm talking the 35% full fat cream. First thing, if you're ever making a cream soup or a chowder or anything like that, and you want to add cream into the broth to make it more of a creamier sauce, especially at a high heat, there's less chances that's going to split. So we'll keep it creamy as opposed to, you get the little white chunks. It's gross. You can also make mac and cheese from scratch by making a classic bechamel and using cream instead of milk, which will kind of stabilize a little bit better. Then you can add grated cheeses of all different kinds and make a mac and cheese out of that. It's a great sauce for a Alfredo sauce. You can use cream as opposed to milk, but the cream actually will last, because it's got more milk fat in it. It will last longer in your fridge, which is the whole idea, right? This way you don't need as much of it. So as much as you think that, oh, it's not as good for me, but if you need a half a thing of milk or 10% cream to make the same sauce, are you really making it any better? Right. So yes, having some milk is always handy, and that's just to thin things out if you need to, or if you have other kind of products or pre-packaged type things in your pantry that might need milk, so just keep an eye on that. But again, I would never overbuy in the milk section unless you go through a lot of it. And the last thing with me is just because if you're anything like me, I'm a cheese hound. So I buy a lot of cheese. I will go through different styles. We've actually had and spoiled ourselves some nights on a weekend when you don't feel like cooking and making a big dinner. There's nothing wrong with doing a full charcuterie cheese platter for dinner. I have to admit that we did that more than once while we were in isolation. So we had some different deli meats, some salami, sliced chorizo, prosciutto. I had some olives and pickles. I had two or three different kinds of cheeses I put on wedges on a board, different kinds of crackers. I had a fresh baguette. I had little pieces of that. Between that, we put on some Netflix, opened a bottle of wine, and we completely forgot that we were in isolation. I felt like we were still on our little mini holiday. So hopefully some of these little tips and shopping lists will give you a little bit of a stretch so that you can extend the time between trips to the grocery store. And this way you can add some variety to it so that you're not so bored of having the same thing all the time. And it's a great time. If you haven't had the opportunity before, now it's time to get back into the kitchen. So make sure to follow us on other episodes, look for online cooking demos, things like that, and it's time to brush up on your skills.